I'd really like to welcome you all to this special Dean's Lecture featuring United States Attorney Andre Birotte, Jr. I'm really pleased to see such a nice audience here from several different schools and departments across the university. It's always nice when we can get together and share our common issues and talk with each other across the schools, because we don't always do that all the time. But I've found that if you have a great speaker and you also have a very important topic, and then if you provide lunch, people show up. So today's distinguished lecture focuses on protecting civil rights and civil liberties in 21st century Los Angeles. And this is a very important topic indeed, not only for LA, but for the country as a whole. And I also should say that it's a very important topic for the Saul Price School of Public Policy. Many of you know that recently we received a $50 million endowment and naming gift from the Price Family Charitable Foundation to honor the life and legacy of Saul Price, the business entrepreneur and philanthropist. And it turns out that Saul Price was not only a great business entrepreneur who revolutionized the retail industry, but he also cared deeply about social issues, including social equity and civil rights. He was the son of immigrants who were involved in the early efforts to unionize the garment workers in New York City. And he was profoundly influenced by their efforts to promote and protect worker rights. So when he founded his first company back in the early 1950s called FedMart, which was the precursor to Walmart and Kmart and the other marts, he was dedicated to promoting equality and equity with his workers, but also to promoting integration of his employees, even in places where the practice of segregation still existed. For example, in his Texas store in 1953, when he proposed to open it up, he almost could not get financing or building permits because he insisted that the break rooms, the restaurants, and the bathrooms all be integrated. And he wouldn't build the store without that. And that was one of the very first stores in Texas that actually had integrated facilities. And it was, so he, from his early age, he really believed in equality, justice, and civil rights and promoted it throughout his life. And he worked at that both nationally and locally to help develop plans and policies, primarily to improve the quality of life for marginalized individuals, mostly in urban areas. So it's very important to us as a school and for the namesake of our school as well. Now it is my real pleasure at this time to introduce today's distinguished lecturer, Andre Birotte, Jr. Mr. Birotte was nominated by President Barack Obama in 2009 to serve as United States Attorney for the Central District of California. And it turns out this district is the nation's most populous, with responsibility for all federal litigation, and it's in LA County, Orange, Riverside, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. So it's really a vast area. And he was unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate and sworn in on March 4, 2010. Prior to this appointment, he was the Inspector General of the Los Angeles Police Commission, a post he held since 2003. And in this role, he led a staff of lawyers, auditors, and former law enforcement executives who conducted and oversaw the LAPD internal investigations and audits to ensure compliance with departmental policies and mandates from the federal consent decree. In addition, Mr. Birotte's extensive experience practicing law includes serving as Deputy Public Defender in Los Angeles, representing indigent clients. He also served as the Assistant Attorney General in the Los Angeles office, where he investigated and prosecuted cases involving violent crime, fraud, and narcotics. And he worked for the Quinn Emanuel Law Firm, where he represented clients in white collar crime, and commercial litigation. So he's had a really broad experience. And interestingly, I've also told that he has taught legal writing and advocacy here at USC's Gould School of Law, so he's also a part of our Trojan family. So please join me in welcoming Andre Birotte.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for hosting this event, and probably most importantly, thank you for providing food, so, because I don't know if anyone would show up otherwise. So, listen, I really am honored to be able to spend some time with you this afternoon, and certainly thank you again to Dean Nada and the entire USC School of Public Policy for this invitation today, and thank all of you for showing up this afternoon. I'm hoping that after my remarks, time permitting, we'll be able to have a dialogue and where you can ask questions, and hopefully I will do my level best to avoid answering them for you. So I am delighted to be here today to talk a little bit about the work of the U.S. Attorney's Office and to address a subject that is near and dear to my heart, and that is specifically preserving and protecting civil rights and civil liberties in the 21st century Los Angeles. I want to start by introducing you a little bit to our office and the work that we do. I've found, unfortunately, that too few people really know about the work of the U.S. Attorney's Office, and one of the things that I made a commitment to was to try to remedy that condition. As Dean Knott indicated, the U.S. Attorney's Office is represents the largest federal judicial district in the country, with a population of close to 19 million people. There are 93 judicial districts in the country, and here in Los Angeles, our U.S. Attorney's Office, we have approximately 270 federal attorneys and about 150 support staff to do the work that we do each and every day. We have offices in Los Angeles, down here on 312 North Spring Street, Riverside, and in Santa Ana. Within our district, with a population of 19 million people, there are 35 cities that have a population of more than 100,000 residents, and there is a virtual cultural diversity that is unmatched throughout the country. And as I mentioned, we've got 270 what we call AUSAs. In the federal system, everything is an acronym, and AUSA stands for Assistant United States Attorney's Office. And they are broken down into 3 specific divisions: our criminal division, our civil division, and our tax division. The breakdown is approximately, we've got about 200 or so criminal prosecutors in the criminal division, about 50 to 60 AUSAs in our civil division, and about 10 to 12 in our tax division. And together, these lawyers are responsible for handling all the federal litigation in this entire district. Now, let me put those numbers in context here, because I think it's illustrative of what I'm talking about here today. Compare our 200 or so criminal prosecutors to represent the 7 counties of the Central District. And by way, just to clarify, we go as far north as San Luis Obispo, down to the Orange County border, and to the east, the Riverside and San Bernardino counties, as well as Ventura and Orange County. But we have about 200 criminal prosecutors to represent the entire district. You compare and contrast that to my good friend Steve Cooley at the LA District Attorney's Office, representing one of the counties of the entire district. They have nearly 1,000 deputy DAs. You go further down south, in Orange County, Tony Rackauckus has approximately 200, or I should say 300, deputy district attorneys to represent Orange County. In fact, all told, there are approximately 2,000 deputy district attorneys to represent the 7 counties of the Central District of California. Now, I'm not complaining, and I don't begrudge any of my colleagues for the work that they do. In fact, they need each and every one of those deputy district attorneys. They probably could use more to deal with the reactive work that occurs in their respective counties. But I share that with you just to give you a sense of one of the priorities that I, and certainly any U.S. attorney in their district, have to do is to prioritize and allocate resources to meet those priorities. But that said, really the challenge, within a challenge, if you will, is to make sure that the priorities that we set forth are in line and in keeping with the communities that we are so proud and privileged to serve. And that's really where community outreach comes in, and I mean community outreach can take place in many ways, shapes, or form. Meeting with various law enforcement, meeting with community members, civil rights advocates groups, and the likes, and meetings like here this afternoon at SC. I am of the belief that it's through outreach and communication with the public that I can really learn what are the issues that are going on in the local communities. And that helps me establish the necessary priorities to make sure, again, that they are in line and that we're doing things that matter in the respective communities. Look, I could be frank and tell you, I could be a U.S. attorney that says I'm going to set forth whatever priorities I want, or I could take a list from sort of the broader priorities, if you will, that come forth from Washington, D.C., all of which are important. But I'm of the belief that to really serve the district, to serve our communities, we must truly engage with our partners and listen, more importantly, to those communities to learn what are their issues, their concerns, and what needs do they have in order that we can properly allocate our resources to help the people in the district. Indeed, from my vantage point, I can see that our communities face numerous threats, and all of which are significant, whether it is gang crime, violent crime, white-collar fraud, cyber crime, IP crime, terrorism, or national security, or healthcare fraud, all of which are significant and going on here in this district. But the community engagement really helps me and helps our office prioritize to make sure that we are addressing the needs of the community. Let me give you one example, something that occurred just last year that talks about sort of our responsiveness to some of the community needs. Local communities in Orange County have been struggling with gang crime. Gang crime has been on the rise down in Orange County. There's been a significant influence and influx of former Mexican mafia members in Orange County, and this is all going on while local law enforcement throughout the state have been pinched in their budgets. And so as a result, in Orange County, we paired up our prosecutors with Orange County deputy district attorneys and as well as local and state investigators. And working together, we built cases both at the federal and local level. Federal prosecutors in our office filed a massive RICO action charging more than 50 street gang members and Mexican mafia members in Santa Ana. And the county prosecutors also filed a series of felony indictments as well. And then, when we conducted our takedown, if you will, we took more than 90 gang members off the streets in one morning. 50 or so were charged federally, and 40 or so were charged with felonies in the state system. And so late last year, ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, one of the agencies involved in this operation, they reported in their quarterly report that the feedback that they got from Santa Ana was tremendous. That Santa Ana had reported significant reductions in violent crime that occurred just from that takedown alone. That's an example of what we call force multiplication, or synergy, if you will, where all of our local law enforcement partners work together, because collectively we can do more than we could do individually. And I would submit to you that the results speak for themselves, and the people of Santa Ana and Orange County benefit as a result. Because if you can imagine, it's one thing, back when I was an assistant United States attorney, the name of the game, if you will, was to target your shot callers, your ringleaders, take down 1, 2, 3, or 4 members. The game has changed so much, such that now we're looking to target the entire gangs, 40, 50, 60 individuals under these RICO indictments. When you take that many people out of a community, the change occurs literally overnight. And I think ultimately the communities benefit as a result. But violent crime and gang crime are not the only areas of interest in this district, certainly. Our public outreach throughout the district has certainly demonstrated to me that protecting civil rights and civil liberties are of acute interest here in this district, and that enforcing civil rights and civil liberties is a subject that's highly relevant in how we live in the 21st century. Now, my time with you is relatively short, and so to set the stage on the subject of civil rights and civil liberties, I want to use as a starting point a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King is certainly one of my personal heroes, and it's often upon his remarks that I rely on as I sort of march through the day-to-day work that we try to do at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And it was Dr. King who so profoundly observed, he said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Okay, let me repeat that. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Now, Dr. King used that phrase many times, so I would submit that it had some significance and meaning to him personally. And we also know that those words have carried on in time and been of importance in modern day history. Indeed, it was April 4th of 2008 when then Junior Senator Barack Obama was speaking at the 40th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King, and he said these words. Dr. King once said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Yes, it bends towards justice, but here's the thing. It does not bend on its own. It bends because each and every one of us, in our own ways, put our hands on that arc of justice, and we bend it in the direction of justice. So in this way, then Senator Barack Obama directly connected Dr. King's observation from the 1960s to our 21st century. When Dr. King assured us more than 4 decades ago that the arc of the moral universe is long, but that it bends towards justice, he did so to comfort and encourage those that were dedicated to making that dream a reality. When then Senator Obama invoked the same words just 4 years ago, he did so as a call to action for our nation. And when I use these words, I see the arc of our moral universe bending towards justice in our city, here in Los Angeles, and throughout the district. And I think to bolster my example, I have to look no further than what has gone on here within the city of Los Angeles and the transformation that I would submit of the relationship between the Los Angeles Police Department and the city in which it serves. That transformation, I think, is no accident, and as a caveat, as Dean Knott indicated to you, I worked within the belly of the beast of LAPD for a number of years, and so perhaps my view is somewhat biased, but I've seen how far that department has come. And it came because, not simply because of the work of the LAPD, it became that way because of the work that many people in this room and many people in the communities of Los Angeles, they put their hands on that arc of justice, and they bent it towards justice. And as a result, I can see that the pursuit of civil rights and civil liberties is very much alive here in this city. And I emphasize the 21st century for several reasons. First, certainly because it is the century that we live in, but I think more importantly, it is a century that our children and our children's children will indeed live in. Naturally, I think when people think about civil rights and civil liberties, they ascribe it as to uniquely a 20th century issue. They think of the titanic struggles that occurred in the 1950s and 60s, vivid struggles that many can remember and struggles that we should not forget. But emphasizing civil rights and civil liberties from a 21st century perspective allows us to look forward while still reflecting and respecting and honoring the work of the past. I am certainly mindful of the great achievements of the past, and indeed I would imagine that I would not be standing here before you as United States Attorney, as the first Haitian American United States Attorney, without the sacrifices and suffering, as well as the courage and the commitment, quite frankly, of the generations that preceded me. I know, and I'm often reminded that I stand, quite frankly, on the shoulders of giants, and I do my best to try to walk the footsteps and follow the footsteps of many giants here in Los Angeles. And one comes to mind that I know some people in this audience know, and that's a good friend and colleague, Los Angeles Police Commissioner John Mack. John Mack was the former president of the Urban League. He also was a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Council in the 1960s, and he has spent virtually his whole life fighting for civil rights, often, quite frankly, at odds with LAPD. Now, fast forward, John Mack has served 2 terms as president of the Los Angeles Police Commission, responsible for the civilian oversight of the Los Angeles Police Department. How times have changed. In my mind, this is an example of a remarkable arc that has occurred in this city, not only for the LAPD, but for the city and its residents. I would submit that Mr. Mack really embodies both a living link to the civil rights struggles from the last decades and a current voice of reform here today. And I suggest that we need to hang on tightly to those and learn as much as we can from people like John Mack and others who have put their hands on that moral arc and help it bend towards justice. We certainly will need all the help that we can get as we face the challenges of the present. challenges to maintain and indeed build upon the gains made by the giants of the civil rights era. And now let me put this challenge, if you will, in context for this city. The challenges that we face can be seen in many ways, shapes, or form, but I want to address 3 specific areas of civil rights and civil liberties that have become front and center here in this city and throughout the district. The 3 subjects that I want to address before I close here today are very different on the surface, but underneath the surface there is a unifying thread. All 3 present distinct challenges and a sensitivity to civil rights and civil liberties that is needed to analyze in order to properly address those subjects. Specifically, I'm talking about the policy and practice of constitutional policing in our streets, a subject that we saw most recently on display in Los Angeles with the Occupy movement from late last year. Second, I want to talk about the policies and practices of constitutional policing in our jails, which is a related but very different subject on many levels. And then third, I want to talk a little bit about the constitutional issues that are presented in the housing and fair lending field. All 3 subjects have been in the news of late. They're not historical by any means, but a sense of history, I think, can help inform and educate us on how we can handle these issues. First, let me talk about the notion of constitutional policing in the streets. As Inspector General for close to 7 years, and prior to that as an Assistant Inspector General, the concept, if you will, of constitutional policing was something that was very much at the front and center of what LAPD was trying to do each day and each night. And I would like to say that I think over that last decade, we've seen that transformation in police practices. It's not perfect, and I don't mean to suggest that it is, but there has been a significant transformation within the LAPD. And I would submit that there's no other major urban police department anywhere in the country that has dedicated its commitment to constitutional policing than the LAPD. That first principle, if you will, and this comes down from Chief Beck and his predecessor, Bill Bratton, is that there is no excuse to break the law in order to enforce the law. And I think today, thanks to Chief Beck, John Mack, and many others who have served on the police commission, that message is really starting to resonate within the troops of the Los Angeles Police Department. And that's significant. Many times, and I've learned this from my time as Inspector General, often the leadership understands what the issues are. But the challenge is getting that message down to the rank and file, to the individuals that we will all meet on a day-to-day basis, and to the individuals that some will meet at very tense times, at 2 o'clock in the morning in a dark alley. That's when the concept of constitutional policing really kicks in, and that's where it's important to make sure that that message resonates down to those officers. Now, if you look at LA history, I think you would know, and I think it would bolster my point, that there has been this significant transformation between the relationship between the communities and LAPD. And I think we have some recent examples about the challenges and opportunities that the goal of constitutional policing presents. And that is, in fact, I think, borne out by what occurred with the Occupy movement here in Los Angeles out on the City Hall lawn just last fall. Now, admittedly, there's no federal involvement relative to the Occupy movement, thank goodness, but it did occur literally across the street from our building. And many of our prosecutors, if you look outside their window, could see the movement each and every day. And to their credit, we saw a lot of changes that are going on with respect to how LAPD reacted to this issue. Indeed, questions of civil rights and civil liberties and the scope and the limits of constitutional policing were intimately involved and intertwined in this debate. And I'm very proud to say that I think LAPD and the city's response to this effort was really a success. Certainly from the perspective, a public safety perspective, and certainly in light of, and when you compare and contrast to some of the reactions in other cities, even in this state, specifically Oakland and Davis, California. A lot of lessons have been learned from prior instances involving crowd control and protecting and preserving civil rights in that realm. And I suspect in the months and years to come, more and more lessons will be learned. And those lessons will only benefit the communities here in Los Angeles. But as an aside, I think it's important to also say that I am proud to say that the United States Department of Justice has long been measured, quite frankly, by its commitment to civil rights, not only here in this district, but throughout the United States. I am talking about and thinking about that spirit, if you will, that animated the Kennedy administration and the Kennedy Justice Department, and when they stood up to segregationist sheriffs and governors in the South. There's a memorable moment in history, one that I would hope that you would not forget, and that's when Deputy Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach stood up to the segregationist sheriffs in the South, and he ultimately walked 2 young African-American students into the gauntlet at the University of Alabama in 1963. Now, those 2 young African-American students, Vivian Malone and James Hood, were brave beyond my comprehension. I was certainly inspired by that Kennedy department and that Kennedy administration, that spirit of justice for all, and I've used that really, not as shaped and informed me, not only when I was an assistant United States attorney, but standing here as United States attorney right now. And it was really that inspiration, and one of the reasons why one of the first things I did as United States attorney was to bring back and reconstitute our public corruption and civil rights section. I wanted to connect today's U.S. Attorney's Office with the historic tradition of fighting for civil rights for all Americans that represents to me the finest that the Department of Justice can offer. That's why certainly one of my top priorities as United States Attorney is the active pursuit of civil rights enforcement for all the residents of this district. And this is a top priority from the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., and from the Attorney General on down. Many of you may or may not know that the Attorney General, Eric Holder, began his career in the public integrity section at Main Justice in Washington, D.C., and he was shaped and informed by that in those formative years. With that in mind, I want to talk to you briefly about the 2 other subjects that I mentioned earlier. I'm referring to policing in our jails and the lending practices of our financial institutions. Now, I certainly, for obvious reasons, can't discuss any pending investigations, particularly when there's a camera in the audience, but I think it is of public record that the Justice Department is investigating allegations of misconduct and excessive force that are occurring within the Los Angeles County jail system. And it's also a matter of public record that the county has taken a proactive approach by working with the county's Office of Independent Review, led by Michael Giannacco, a colleague of mine not only at the U.S. Attorney's Office, but in the civilian oversight realm as he endeavors or leads the office's efforts to provide oversight of the Sheriff's Department. And the Board of Supervisors has formed or convened a county jails commission to look at issues that are going on within the jails. And the reality, I'm sure people have read all the various articles relative to that, but it is a subject, at least from my vantage point, that really should not be of particular controversy. Indeed, constitutional policing concepts and principles don't merely apply to the streets, but also to our jails as well. And the bottom line from my vantage point is that police officers and sworn peace officers cannot, in any way, shape, or form, break the law to enforce the law in any setting. Because the reality of it is that when an officer breaks the law to enforce the law, all of us in law enforcement are certainly tarred by that brush, and we, in many ways, irreparably harm or damage with the communities. And I've learned, if not anything else, I've learned so much in my time as Inspector General and United States Attorneys, as United States Attorney, that we cannot do this job alone. The only way that we are going to be successful in protecting and serving the public is through our work with you. And when we damage that relationship, it really ripples beyond imagination. And that's why I think we all must remain vigilant and must insist on the very best from our law enforcement officers. Now, I've spent the vast majority of my career in and around the criminal justice system, thankfully not as a defendant, but I've worked with officers day in and day out, and I've been in patrol calls, in patrol cars at many hours in the evening. And I am proud to say that in my experience, I've seen the very best in law enforcement, time and time and time again, at the local level, at the state level, the county level, and certainly now at the federal level. But we have to remain vigilant, and we have to stay true to our ideals in order to continue to get the very best from our law enforcement personnel. Now, again, before I close, I don't want to leave the impression that I think that civil rights and civil liberties are simply limited to the area of policing. certainly not the case. Just 6 weeks ago, my office, working with the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., announced a historic settlement with the Bank of America over allegations that Countrywide Bank, a bank that B of A had purchased, had engaged in the illegal practice of steering minority customers, predominantly African American and Latino, into higher risk junk loans. These high risk loans effectively trapped these customers into debt that they simply could not repay, creating this vicious cycle of debt and foreclosure, the effects of which we are still dealing with here and now. Now, that settlement had been the product of years of investigations and hard work amongst a number of federal, state, and local investigators, and it was a dramatic settlement on many levels, particularly here in this district where a number of residents in Los Angeles County, Riverside County, Ventura County, and Orange County in particular were directly impacted. Now, I'm not here to say that that was the perfect settlement, but I think it was a significant demonstration of the commitment of the Department of Justice to look at the lending practices that had, in my humble opinion, an impact on the economic crisis that we are facing here today. And upon announcing this consent decree settlement, we received numerous feedback from numerous sources in the housing rights advocacy groups that had indicated that this issue had been percolating around and they weren't sure if there was anyone or where to go to address this, and they were pleased to see that the federal government was trying to take some efforts to hold people accountable for their conduct. So, as I bring my remarks to a close, I want to suggest to you that civil rights enforcement, the subject that I've had the opportunity to speak with you today, is very much alive and well, and very much a part of the public policy debate here in 21st century Los Angeles and in the Department of Justice. And we're all part of that discussion, and we should all be engaged in that part of the discussion. And let me say that the enforcement efforts that I've tried to outline today are really just one part of the entire spectrum of efforts that make up the whole canvas of civil rights activity in our communities, at both the public and the private levels. Honestly, our work in this field is never truly done. It's never truly finished. Certainly, if our goal is to build and maintain a society where all persons are treated equally and fairly under the law. Now, in closing, I must stress that protecting civil rights and civil liberties is not simply a matter of federal interest, or solely a matter of governmental interest. To be genuinely effective, those of us in the federal government must work in harmony with our state, our county, and local partners. And that includes partners both in the public and private sector. That includes people like you here in this room this afternoon. Working together, both at the public and private level, I think we can make society a better place, a more just place, and we can continue to bend that moral arc of the universe in the 21st century towards justice for all of us and our children and our children's children. Now, I would submit to you that the vision outlined by Dr. King is a vision that we should all subscribe to. I know this, and I look very, very much forward to working with you to make sure that that vision stays at the forefront of our minds. And if I could leave you with just one final takeaway, it'd be this: a reminder to all of you that you must stay engaged in this public policy debate, and for all of you to never take your hands off that moral arc of the universe and continue to fight and make sure it bends towards justice. So thank you for the time today, and I hope we have some time for some questions. I'd like to open it up if we could. So thank you. Now for the hard part. All right. Yes?
The issue, though, that I find quite, well, I'm not quite sure what word I can use for it, but I suppose I feel quite troubled. I think that's a good word. I feel quite troubled is that there's so many young black men in the California jails, and I'm wondering if civil rights is working as well as you say it is. Why is that the case? Surely they can't be you know, they commit the worst offending in the whole of California compared to everyone else. There must be something going on that is causing this discrepancy.
Okay, now that's a question to start off here. Okay. And look, I'll be honest with you, I don't know if I can answer that question specifically other than to say simply this. One of the things that we have tried to do specifically in our office and in the broader Department of Justice is to make sure that we focus our resources where we can have the broadest impact, whether it is in the white-collar arena, the gang arena, or the like. And many times we are being responsive to the needs of the community. And unfortunately, the reality of it is here in this region, gang crime has become a problem. I shouldn't say become, is a problem here in the district. And we try to use our efforts as best we can to try to rid that. Now, I will tell you, it's interesting, the specific question you raise host a variety of issues, quite frankly. I mean, there are books and studies that talk about sort of, you know, whether the drug laws are such that it causes the basic warehousing of black and brown individuals throughout the country. And I couldn't really comment one way or the other. But what we try to do in the Department of Justice is to make sure that we utilize our resources and provide the biggest impact on cases, whether it's gang crime and those gang members happen to be African American or Latino, or in cases where we've targeted members of the Aryan Brotherhood. We try to make sure we get, for lack of a better term, the biggest bang for our buck.
Hi, my name is Brittany Shquata. I'm a first-year MPP student here. So when you're talking about the arc of moral justice and using the Barack Obama quote quoting Martin Luther King, for me, currently it feels like the arc of bending that arc is defined differently depending on who's in power, who's given that definition. So I guess kind of building off of the last question, how do you overcome legislation that explicitly infringes on civil rights? And what comes to mind is the recent Supreme Court decision saying that you could have a strip search regardless of whether or not there was evidence. And, you know, legislation like that, basically going off the last question, disparately seems to impact communities of color. So how do you or your office or just your profession, how do you overcome that type of legislation when it kind of doesn't feel like it's built from the right, coming from the right position in the first place?
Well, look, again, in the interest of candor, I've not read the decision. I believe it just came down yesterday. I'm just sort of reading sort of summaries of it that talk about the notion that you can do strip searches, or I should say, at least my sense, and again, I haven't read the entire opinion, or I haven't read the opinion at all, talks about the notion that you could do a strip search. A jail has the ability to do a strip search even if the reason by which someone is brought into jail may be, and I think in the case at issue, it was a traffic offense. And so we'll have to see what the impacts are going to be relative to that, you know, as time moves forward. But I will say this, I do think that, you know, as it relates to the Department of Justice, we still try to do our best to keep our eyes on issues, concerns, legislation, and the like that cause, or at least in the Department of Justice opinion, cause issues. I think you look at the Department of Justice as it relates to the litigation that's been ongoing with the state of Arizona and how they treat immigrants. We are always proactive as it relates to elections and monitoring elections where we have received information to suggest that there may be some issues there. So I think the Department of Justice tries as best as it can to be proactive, but ultimately our job is to enforce the law. And if the law says X, that's our duty to do that. But at the same time, I think we are vigilant to make sure that when, in the case of, you know, Arizona or some other places throughout the country, that we are monitoring what's going on as it relates to state and local ordinances and laws to make sure that they comport with the standards that we expect within the Department of Justice. Yes, sir.
My name is Gabriel Enriquez. I'm a third-year law student here at SC, and this month marks the 20th anniversary of the LA riots. Central to the riots were civil liberty and civil right infringement. You talked about lessons that you had learned. What lessons have you learned from that incident in particular, and also what role do you see for the federal judiciary in resolving an issue like that?
You're right. It is the 20th anniversary, and I have probably more to say, and I'd love to talk with you more offline about this, because there's so many lessons that were learned from not only the LA riots, but what's gone on since. Quite frankly, the LA riots in many ways was the catalyst for what ended up becoming an LAPD federal consent decree that I was the Inspector General during a majority of that time. I started in 2001 when that decree was signed. So, that's something that resonates with me. And to your point about the federal judiciary, that was overseen, that litigation, the consent decree was overseen by a federal judge who appointed a monitor to work at his behest. But as it relates to sort of lessons that were learned, one thing that comes to mind, and certainly a lesson I learned in my almost 10 years at LAPD, was the importance of community engagement. I think if you look back historically at what was going on at LAPD during the riots, and as an aside, I was a deputy public defender not only when the verdict came down, but then during the actual riots. A fascinating time looking back historically as a deputy public defender when that was going on. But at that time, it was very much us versus them mentality, sort of the drive and occupy, if you will, communities. Never sort of engaging with the community, never sort of talking and getting information. It was just, we're just here to basically keep everyone at home. And I think that sort of mentality and attitude just started to build, fester, and ultimately popped during the riots. And look, the lessons that were learned go on and on and on, and LAPD and many law enforcement agencies, I think most would agree, are not perfect animals. They're not perfect societies, and we are constantly learning. But I think the biggest lesson for me is that engagement piece. The fact that you needed a federal consent decree to force LAPD to have conversation and community engagement meetings was significant, and it really did change how LAPD was viewed. I mean, and even going back to sort of some of the mistakes that were made, I was the Inspector General during the May Day rally that occurred, I'm drawing a blank on the year, where LAPD came and basically took out all of MacArthur Park in one fell swoop. Really a black eye at LAPD in relation to how they dealt with crowd control. But the silver lining of that incident, as tragic as it was the fact that they had built up some goodwill within the community. They had been spending time so that the community was willing to meet and engage with them. I literally, during that time, I was thinking, boy, if this had happened 5 years earlier, we probably would have had another riot, because emotions were so raw, so tense. It was on national footage. And so that's why I come back to the notion of that engagement piece, because it really helps build a lot of connection and relationships, so that when times get tense, and they are going to get tense in law enforcement, they can have a conversation about it. Yes, sir.
First, I'd like to make a comment. Just want to thank you for being here. It's really wonderful to take some time out of your day to be with us. I had the privilege of working with your office quite a few years ago in a prior life when I worked for defense lawyers. No booze, please. And your U.S. attorneys were great. They were fair. So I guess my first question is, how do you ensure that that tradition continues under your reign? That's first question, number one. Number two, what is the catalyst for your office to get involved when you see, like, say, like the situation in Florida when there's, in the Martin case, things like that? What's the catalyst?
Okay. Let me talk about the first question that you raised about how do we sort of maintain that tradition, if you will, of excellence and justice. In some ways, it is easy in the sense that, look, people come to our office because they come because they want to do the right thing. But also, I think it's incumbent upon myself, the managers in the front office, to continue to remind people of the importance of this work, and that the purpose is to do just that, justice. I tell new prosecutors when they start to work, I bring them into my office when the new class comes in and says, look, welcome to the greatest job that you're going to ever have. And I say, trust me, I've been in and around. I said, it's better than the job I have now. I loved being an AUSA. But remember, when you come into this job, you come in with a reservoir of trust and goodwill. And your objective is to make sure that reservoir is full at all times. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is by doing the right thing, the right way, all the time. And for me, what I try to convey that message and really just imparted every opportunity I get, because I want to make sure that that culture of excellence stays again and again and again. As it relates to how we get engaged in cases, it can take place in a variety of methods. We're lucky we live in a big city. We've got the whole alphabet soup of federal agencies, ATF, FBI, ICE, DEA, et cetera, that are constantly out there working with communities, generating cases. But there are times where we may read something, whether it be in the LA Times, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, that may cause us to become proactive in an investigation. And so it's both reactive and proactive as well. Many times, quite frankly, I know you worked in the defense field, we may get a call from corporate counsel that has realized that during an internal investigation that there's some fraud going on and they want us to take action. And so it comes from a variety of different sources. The main thing is to making sure, quite frankly, that people know who we are, what we do, and that we're open for business. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your comments. My name is John Roberson, second year MPP in the Price School as well. So my question goes back to this ideal of community engagement as well as justice, which you talked about. First, with thinking about riots and the 20th anniversary of the LA uprising as well as the Trayvon Martin incident, I think that what we saw with the LA incident especially is that not a lack of community engagement per se, but just the lack to actually uphold this ideal of justice, sort of what Brittany was getting at earlier, in the sense that the communities actually waited for the courts to uphold what they felt to be a just law. And until that decision came down, with the repeated viewing of Rodney King on TV and whatnot, the community still didn't riot until the decision came down. And I'm very interested to see how this Trayvon Martin case pans out with George Zimmerman and whatnot. But I guess my question to you is, what is your office doing to ensure that, or could you talk more about specific strategies that your office incorporates to actually engage these communities? Because oftentimes I think it's a lack or a disconnect between communities of color when you talk about actually having access to the proper channels to engage offices such as yours.
Right. And you raise a very good point with respect to the LA riots, about communities waiting for the verdict and hoping justice would prevail. I was talking about something a little different. You had that piece, certainly, but part of the problem was that, as legend would have it, when the community came to complain about what happened in the Rodney King incidents to the police, it was a wall. And that's the piece that I'm talking about. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think that prior blockage really was sort of the embers, if you will, that caused things to sort of pop off. And so one of the things that, to your other question with respect to what do we try to do in the U.S. Attorney's Office, I've made this one of my top priorities, to get out as much as possible. And that includes meetings like here today. You could ask Bruce Reardon, who's my special counsel. I probably spend 2 to 3 nights a week at various community functions, sort of spreading, if you will, the word of the U.S. Attorney's Office, but more importantly, so that people understand what we do and giving them access, whether it's law students, public policy students, community groups, housing groups. I'm out, Arab Muslim groups. I try to do everything that I can. Now look, we represent a district of 19 million people, and I've done the drives to San Luis Obispo, Riverside County, et cetera. We're doing everything we can to get that word out, but some of that I would submit is incumbent upon people like yourselves. When you hear this information, you let your stakeholders and your constituents know, well, there's a U.S. Attorney's Office, here's what they can do, here's their website, that kind of thing. So it's a work in progress, and it's one that I'm committed to doing as long as I have this job, and that's what I've been trying to do. I mean, like I said, whether, particularly as it relates to communities that I feel may not even have known about our office and or felt that they didn't have access to our office. And so, Bruce, we convened for the first time, I think, in the history of the office. We have a community outreach coordinator, a team where it's Bruce, Jamaica Williams, who's on travel today, Ted Marquez, who's our our law enforcement coordinator, working together, trying to identify, audiences that we need to spread the word to, and making sure that people know what we do. So, and I'll throw two other things that we've tried to do sort of to give you specific examples. The mayor of Los Angeles has a wonderful program, at least I think it's wonderful, called the Summer Night Lights program, where every Wednesday through Saturday in the summer months, they open up parks and provide services where kids can read, face painting, play basketball, skateboard contests, barbecues, etc. And the reason why they pick those nights is that the studies have shown in the summer months, those are the nights where violence tends to spike. So for the first time, our office partnered up with the mayor's office, and we have federal prosecutors that are out there on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, just, for lack of a better term, just kicking it, just hanging out with the community members in an informal setting, because I want people to see us not for the first time in the courtroom, but out in a basketball court or a skateboard park or face painting. I mean, we have all kinds of funny pictures of people painting my nails and face painting with the kids. I mean, because I want them to see people that look like them doing something other than gangbanging in the street. So that's one thing that we will participate again this summer, and we had a meeting just a couple weeks ago where we may actually try to, for lack of a better term, say Jim Gilliam Park, for example, will be the park where every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or at least one day of that week, every week during the summer, there will be a presence of the U.S. Attorney's Office. Another thing that we're working on, April 28th, over in the Crenshaw District, we'll be hosting a community Consumer Protection Community Summit. Today I know we talked about civil rights and civil liberties, but you guys would be stunned at the kinds of scams that are going on the internet, via phone, and they are targeting the elderly and minority communities. I jokingly I'll ask this question: how many of you have received the email from our Nigerian brothers and sisters seeking some assistance in if I give you this money, will you hold it for me? All you need to do is wire me $10,000 so I can give it to you. That's one example. You get what's called the relative in distress scam, where they are targeting the elderly, saying, someone will pick up the phone, they'll say, "Grandma," and then the person will respond, "Johnny? Yeah, it's Johnny. I'm in jail in Mexico. I need bail money. All you got to do is wire it to Western Union. Are you sure about this? Here, talk to my lawyer." Some other person gets on the phone. He's in jail. He needs this money to bail out. The Mexican authorities are corrupt. You need to bribe us in order to get. And people fall for this day in and day out. We held a press conference, and the significance of the press conference was it was people that looked just like us. People who were educated, city employees, county employees that fell for these types of scams. And I'm just rifling off just a couple. But we are going to convene a summit with stakeholders and law enforcement to make sure we have identified all the scams and ask our community stakeholders to spread the word out to your communities that this stuff is going on. Many times people are too embarrassed to come forward, and that allows the scams to perpetuate. There's another scam where they say, you just won the lottery in Costa Rica. $10 million will be yours. All you've got to do is pay the taxes, and that money will get wired to you in 24 hours. Wire, $5,000, $10,000, and boom, the money goes out. And so we, after hearing about these scams, I said, we've got to do something to get the word out to the communities. And so we're going to be meeting, Bruce, it's at the Milliken Center, I think?
Yeah, it's at the Milliken Family and Youth Center in the Crenshaw District, run by the LA Urban League. Right. And also, by the way, Andre, given a couple of comments, I can get to the dean. When we go this summer to the Summer Night Lights at Jim Gilliam Park, which is just a few miles away over in Rodeo, when we go, I can get the information to the dean and give it out. If one or two people want to come, you're welcome to come with us. It's a great time.
It is. It really is. But I mean, these are the kind of things that we're trying to do. Now look, I've been U.S. Attorney for 2 years, and so Rome wasn't built in a day, but I'm going to keep running until my time is up to try to do efforts like that. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for this time. I want to go back to the first question. You mentioned very interesting things, the relationship between law and justice. We have a lot of law here in this country that doesn't represent justice in a society. And in history, always to bring justice, the history was they have to break the law to be able to bring the justice. and you are in a good position. I know it's not easy question, but at least I wanted to mention it, that if you want to bring the justice and is against the law, what's going to happen?
Well, it is a difficult question, I will admit. But I think I go back to the point that you look, if there are instances that occur throughout the country where there are laws that may be viewed as unjust, and that is the role of the federal government to try as best as possible to intervene in those instances. It's not a perfect system. There may be other laws on the books that others may feel are unjust and the federal government does not intervene. But I think one of the roles of the broader Department of Justice is try to look throughout the country for examples where a state law or statute may be, in the eyes of the Justice Department, something that runs afoul of what we would expect, and we try as best we can to intervene. Yes, sir.
And I just wanted to ask you, going back to this sense of connecting with communities, what communities need, and then at the same time kind of being in your position of leadership where you just have to kind of respond to some of the federal expectations or at least address some of the federal expectations while at the same time be kind of in the middle trying to bring at the state and federal level the importance of what communities need. Now, bringing back this very historical, situation has happened is kind of in the making of criminalizing immigrants, right, at all different levels. It is very interesting to me, just kind of we're at a very crucial point in which law is playing a very important role in terms of where it's going within programs like Safe Communities. They're at a federal level where it kind of try to, expect to fingerprint and kind of have a structured program of maybe identifying criminals. But at the same time, this having an unintended effect of creating fear and other types of negative feelings among communities. So I can see kind of your position leadership really being in the middle and really calling for those principles that you were talking about, because it is a very complex issue. Right. And then always kind of going back to, okay, what is it that my kind of moral compass kind of dictates here? So I was wondering if you can kind of give us a couple examples about how this plays out.
I will say this, and again, look, I've been U.S. Attorney for 2 years, and I can't speak to how other U.S. attorneys have acted under different administrations, but I will tell you this. The Attorney General has made it clear, and the President, quite frankly, that our job is to do what's right by our district, to address the needs and concerns of the district. I will, as an aside, share a story with you that I think exemplifies that point. We were at a U.S. Attorneys Conference. From time to time, they convene all the U.S. attorneys together. They told us that we would get we would be meeting with someone from the White House. And so we all assumed that it would be a representative from the White House. Fast forward, next thing you know, we're in the White House. And I'm still expecting some staffer from the White House to come in and tell us what the president's priorities are, et cetera. So we're in a room, and walking down the hall is the president. Now, as an aside, when he walked in the room, there might as well have been theme music in my mind, because I was just like, whoa, it's the President of the United States. But he said to us, he said, look, I've appointed you all, but you don't work for me. You work for the people in your district, and your job is to do right by them. That means engaging with them and connecting with them and identifying what their needs, their concerns are. And so, I don't feel, quite frankly, caught in the middle in that respect, because I think the Department of Justice and the Attorney General specifically, Eric Holder, who was a United States attorney himself, he understands that it's important for us to really set priorities that are responsive to the district needs. Now, as it relates to the immigration issue, it is a very complex, as you know, thorny issue, one that you could do a whole lecture on in classes about. I will say this as it relates to what we try to do in the U.S. Attorney's Office. What we try to focus on, again, is the priority cases that make the biggest impact. We are not out as sort of the immigration police just trying to sweep up, check everyone's ID as they come across the streets. Our focus has been relative to those that are high target or high recidivists. So when you see prosecutions that come from our office, I would say the vast majority, the vast overwhelming majority, are individuals that are here illegally that have significant criminal histories. And I'm not talking simply, and I don't mean to generalize or minimize this, someone who's picked up a DUI here or there. We're talking violent felons, gang members, murderers, etc. That's where we try to focus our federal resources as it relates to the prosecution of those that are here in this country without authorization. But again, I don't mean to suggest that it is as simple as that. I understand the issues and concerns relative to safe communities, but I think it's important to let people here know where we try to focus our efforts.
Great.
I want to thank you, Andre, for this excellent talk and introduction also to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and for your engaging with all of us on these challenging but very important questions. Please join me in thanking our guests. Thank you.